Hello, I'm John. Welcome back to my channel, Must Read More. Today I'm going to talk about Anthony Bourdain's Kitchen Confidential, Adventures in the Culinary Underbelly. Which I talked about this in a video I made about a week and a half ago, somewhere in there. And when I was editing it, I realized that I really didn't talk about the book very much. I talked about how influential Anthony Bourdain had been on me during my formative years. And so I thought that I would make this video just to talk about what the book itself is actually about. This is a memoir told basically through a series of essays, starting out with a trip to France that he took with his brother and his parents in the early 60s, and kind of his first experience of food, of, different food, of what is it? He was on the Queen Mary, I believe. They took the Queen Mary over to France, and he was really surprised one day when the waiter put some soup down in front of him, and it was cold soup, and he'd never had cold soup before, and he just thought that was crazy, and he just loved that. And then he went, they went on a trip with one of their relatives' neighbors, and he harvested oysters for a living, so they went out on his boat, and they had to wait for the tide to go down, and everybody got really hungry. So the guy said, "Well, do you want some oysters?" And they were all kind of like, "No." But Anthony was like, "Yeah, give it to me." And he slurped it down. And that was kind of his awakening moment with food. And uh, it got to a point where, when they were in France, where his parents would leave him and his brother in the car because they would go into these French restaurants and the kids wouldn't want to eat any of the food. So, so of course they'd act up and everything, so they just leave them in the car. So Anthony determined that he would eat the weirdest stuff he could possibly eat, and he just ate all kinds of weird stuff. Just this, what is the weirdest thing on the menu? He would eat it. And so that's kind of where his love affair with food began. And later on, he went to college for a little while, and it didn't really work out for him. He started to do some drugs. He was doing kind of some illegal stuff. And one summer, I think some of his friends rented an apartment in, I believe it's in Provincetown, Rhode Island. I believe that's where it was. And he got a job working in the kitchen of one of these restaurants. And it just amazed him how he he came to see chefs as these kind of doped up, hungover, sleep deprived, heavily armed, multilingual pirates running these fry stations and big grills and all this kind of stuff, using their knives really well. And he was just he just fell in love with this culture, this chef subculture. So he determined over the summer that he was going to be a chef, and he quit going to college, and he went to the CIA, the Culinary Institute of America. This is in the 70s, and at that time, it wasn't like it is now. This was a whole different era when carving meat, and it was just completely different, really, from the kind of food we're used to seeing now. Uh, Still the same kind of food, but different presentations, very different presentations. Meats carved at the table and things set on fire and weird molds and all kind of interesting stuff like that. And he was kind of a rebel, and it was just really interesting. He talks about how he had all these crazy teachers, with these. Some of them were very, very mean teachers and would really treat their students pretty poorly. And so after he got I think a semester or two of uh, culinary training, he went back to Provincetown, and he determined, he was going to be the big guy. He was going to show these pirates he's one of them. And he shows up to town in like a powder blue leisure suit, seersucker suit kind of thing, and he's talking a big talk, and I can do this and I can do that, and I've done that. And he doesn't realize that he's pretty much all talk. And these are people who have been working in restaurants for years and years and years. They're used to, doing 150, 200 more meals a night, just banging them out one after another, working, 4 burners at a time, doing this, doing that all at once. He's talking, talking, talking. And they get into the service and he just cannot keep up. He just can't do it. And he burns himself, and they all jeer at him because he asks for a Band-Aid, and the guy holds his hands up and is just covered in scars and burns and peeling flesh basically. He says, look at that. And it awakened in him this desire. I want to be one of these guys. I want to be a chef. I want to be tough. And so he starts working in all these kitchens in New York City, all these just, some of them terrible, some of them just absolutely terrible, with really bad owners and really dirty places. There's at one point where he talks about, and he was in the middle of a drug addiction, a serious drug addiction to both heroin and cocaine at this point in time. So he talks about this one restaurant he was working in at the time where there was a serious rat problem. So the rats would take like old food, like left around, and bones and things, and hide them in the ceiling tiles, and the ceiling tiles would collapse over the over the grills and things. And at the same time, he and everybody else they would sneak into the stairwells to smoke crack, and it was just a really interesting look at that, and just the absolute debauchery that these chefs got up to. And later he worked in a mobbed up restaurant for a while, where like mob guys he had seen in the news would come in and would help cook and would help prepare food, and they would take deliveries to houses and stuff like that. Just a really, really interesting look into the kitchens of the 70s and 80s. And he goes on to talk about, like, what do you need if you want to kind of take your home cooking up a notch, And there's a really interesting thing that stuck with me for 15, 16 years now. Now he talks about if you have a saute pan, and if you don't know if it's thick enough, let me read it, if I can find it. Let me stress this again. Heavy weight. A thin-bottomed saucepan is useless for anything. I don't care if it's bonded with copper, hand-rubbed by virgins, or fashioned from the same material they built the stealth bomber out of. If you like scorched sauces, carbonized chicken, pasta that sticks to the bottom of the pot, and burnt breadcrumbs, then be my guest. A proper saute pan should cause serious head injury if brought down hard against someone's skull. If you have any doubts about which will dent, the victim's head or your pan, then throw that pan right in the trash. So that stuck with me for 16 years. And that's just, and he wrote so much like he spoke. And so the whole time I was rereading this book, I heard the whole thing in his voice. It was just spectacular, And he talks about, for a while he worked at the Rainbow Room at Rockefeller Center, and how they found a window. They would crawl out of this window and sit on the ledge of something like the 64th floor of Rockefeller Center with their arms wound around a sash, like a window sash, smoking joints. That's pretty crazy. Just all kinds of things. Just all kinds of debauchery he saw, all kinds of debauchery he took part in. It's just a really, really interesting look into that kind of, like I said, that kind of chef culture of the time, which I'm sure everything is very different now. There's a segment where he talks about a day in the life of a chef when he was working in Manhattan at a restaurant, just what his daily life was like, how he would have to get up early and work all day, how to order the food, how to deal with the vendors, that kind of thing, what to do when you run out of potatoes. It was just really, really interesting. just to see into that world, that kind of hidden world, you know. I've never worked in a restaurant or anything like that. I know loads and loads of people have, but I never have. So it was just this sneak peek into what's going on behind those closed doors, or at least what was going on behind those closed doors in the 70s and 80s. And uh, there's a little segment where he spends some time in Japan, his first trip to Japan. He This book was published in 1999, by the way. I believe. I believe this was published in 99. It was, you know, this is the book that set him off on his course to being on, I think he was on it was published in 2000. I think he was on the Food Network first, and then he was on Travel Channel with No Reservations. And this is the book that made him famous. Before that, he was just some cook in a restaurant, you know, he was just a regular guy. And he fully believed he was going to be a chef the rest of his life. And it's just a really good book. I really enjoy this book, and it's one of my favorites. So if you're into memoirs, if you're into, uh, particularly if you're into reading memoirs about people with uh, questionable behavior and questionable morals, and a sneak peek into that hidden world of the restaurant kitchen, this would be a good book to read. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.